After discussing with my colleagues who watched the previous video, it became clear to me that I may have not adequately explained the concept of the true economic damage caused by landfills, leaving room for confusion when looking at the presented graph. And in order to address this issue, I have decided to take more few minutes to elaborate. Let's start by restating the main question. What is the missing piece of information that is preventing waste managers and decision makers in the GCC and MENA regions from fully understanding the economic impact of landfills and waste disposal? To answer this question, let's revisit the graph to add some additional illustrations. First, let's view the graph as two sides of a balance sheet, or a scale if you want. The top side represents the positive aspects, such as assets, gains, credit, or benefits to the owner. In this case, logically, the bottom side is the negative aspects, such as liabilities, losses, debit, or damage. Now, let's agree that in order to bring the negative trend to a neutral position, or maybe even to a positive one, we need to deploy valuable assets, investments, maybe put efforts, or introduce other resources that have financial returns. Now, in the graph shown in the previous video, the negative financial effects of a landfill can be divided into three categories. The first category is the direct expenses associated with obtaining licenses and permits, constructing and operating the landfill, and providing the aftercare or closure activities. The second negative effect is the opportunity cost of locking the land and its surrounding area away from potential urban development. Now, the third one is the hidden negative effect that is social and environmental in nature. This relates to the impact on the quality of life of those living in the surrounding area of the disposal site and even beyond. So how do we counterbalance these negative effects? Well, the expenditures can be offset logically by implementing gate fees and compensate for all the development, construction, operations, and maintenance activities during the landfill active life cycle. Additionally, the negative impact of locking the land and its surrounding can be compensated by implementing another incremental fee that compensates for the loss of potential opportunities. It is crucial to have a compensatory mechanism in place to cover the costs of aftercare activities. As mentioned in the previous video, if you remember, the amount of funds needed for that will depend on the decision made by the authorities. I remind you that we discussed three options, but the only viable option for returning the land to the economic cycle is option number 3, which involves complete remediation and decontamination of the land. However, there is a third factor, the social and environmental one, that has significant adverse effect and requires compensatory mechanism, which is a complex issue. On one hand, the cost of neutralizing these effects must be covered, which may result in higher disposal fee. On the other hand, these fees must be increased even further to fund research and development for better materials and practices to prevent these effects in the future. Now, it is crucial to begin collecting these fees from the very first day that waste is dumped in the landfill. Now, it may become clear for you that the only way to design a proper compensatory mechanism is to calculate all the expenses and losses, then group them into one fee. This cumulative fee over the full lifetime of the landfill should look like this. Consequently, it also becomes easier for you now to comprehend the amount of subsidy that is spent by anyone but the waste generator if the recommended compensatory mechanism is not or partially implemented. Now let's answer this question. How is the gap between this illustration and reality created in GCC and MENA regions? Well, first, in the majority of cases, the land is given for free to the municipality or local authority for the use as a landfill. And this, of course, means that the land is not valued, leased, or depreciated. Unfortunately, this results in the land being seen as a zero-value asset for its entire lifetime. And honestly, this is concerning because if the land were allocated for an alternative waste management solution such as recovery or recycling facility, the investor would be required to pay a rent at least. This raises the first question of whether this is a form of waste dumping subsidy. Do you agree? Now, next, the owners of these landfills in our regions are often government entities who use government funding to finance the landfill development process. These funds, of course, are not meant to be returned to the government, which could also be seen as an additional form of subsidy. Moreover, in some cases, the municipality or local authority may operate the landfill themselves, and all the fixed and variable costs in this case are either financed again from the municipality budget or reduced to the minimum by potentially cutting corners on important measures such as environmental and social precautions. It is sometimes, to be honest, astonishing to hear that such savings are made to relieve the financial burden on the residents or the businesses. But at what cost? Now, furthermore, these landfills are built to last, meaning the remediation and decontamination are never considered. This leaves only two options for the landfill's closure, both of which are financed again by the government budget. And this is because by the end of the landfill lifetime, it is closed and the disposal fees are no longer available as waste reception is stopped. It is rare to find a landfill in our region that has been completely closed and remediated during the last 50 years, which raises a question of whether this is an additional form of subsidy. In many cases, municipalities do not operate landfills or manage their after-active life cycle care. However, in these cases, the job is given to contractors who offer the lowest price. And even though the landfill fees are still controlled and capped by the municipalities and local authorities without considering the true full cost of landfills. The opportunity cost or the losses caused by locking the land and its surroundings are not taken into account by local authorities when designing, operating, or closing landfills, as we mentioned before. And as a result, municipalities and local authorities in our region do not consider this dimension when setting landfill fees or taxes. And this leads to very low landfill gate fees, but it also hinders the emergence of alternative solutions that must follow strict business and investment rules. And eventually, when all these adverse effects are skimmed out or simply ignored, we end up with a very generous landfill gate fees offered by municipalities and local authorities, leaving the government with the rest of the cost to manage from its budget. The amount of subsidy in this case is substantial, as you can see in the graph. When switching to the mathematical model that was presented in the previous video, you can see that the proposed formula includes all the possible damages caused by landfill, because it considers the total expenses to design and build the landfill, the cost of locking the land, the social and environmental cost, and the cost of emissions caused by the assets used and the biodegradable waste. To make sure that the formula is true for the whole life cycle of the landfill, it is adjusted based on a factor that is designed according to the changes in the costs, expenses, and the size of the lost opportunity for the previous audited period.